back with another episode of Before You Buy, that show where we give you some straight up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. As usual, it's me, Jake, and today we're talking about Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver 1 and 2 Remastered. This is the Embracer Group owned now Crystal Dynamics, working with developers Aspyr, who often do these types of games, to release these original classics on modern platforms with a couple of fixes. And frankly, they did a really good job. But it's a light touch remaster. You know, the quality of life fixes and updates to things only go so far here. And it can be frustrating for younger audiences who've, never touched an old PS1 game. These games still show their age 100% in a lot of aspects. But besides that, this is a really, really solid porting and cleaning up of these original games. They're playable and preserved here in good fashion with a couple of little bonus bells and whistles I definitely want to talk about. So, just jumping into it, Soul Reaver 1 is from 1999, and it was a huge deal. It felt incredibly unique at the time, not just from the somewhat seamless size and feel of the world, but also just the really unique story and the presentation and the characters. It's technically a sequel to the PS1 classic Blood Omen, but starring a new playable character. Either way, you don't need to know that. It'll fill you in. You'll be fine. So, in this story, Kain, an awesome vampire lord, rules over the land of Nosgoth, a place that once flourished but has fallen into decay after thousands of years of his rule, with humans near extinction. There's a lot more to even just that, but I'm just keeping it simple here. His vampire lieutenants all follow his orders, but when Raziel, his best, reveals these newly grown cool wings, and if what seems like a moment of jealousy, Kain rips them off and tosses him into oblivion. Raziel is resurrected many years later as a sort of otherworldly ghost vampire, and he sets out for revenge. This is where we start.
I am Raziel, firstborn of his lieutenants. I stood with Kain and my brethren at the dawn of the Empire. I have served him a millennium. Over time, we became less human and more divine. Kain would enter the state of change and emerge with a new gift.
So, Raziel fights with his claws, objects he can pick up in the environment, and eventually his Wraith Blade. As you explore, you can climb stuff, you can glide and move objects. Look, it's fairly simple, but the layout of areas is often pretty interesting. The biggest update is also the analog stick controls here. You get full 360-degree movement of the character and the camera. This usually always makes a huge difference in these older games when they update it like this, and it totally does here. It's just easier to navigate and do stuff and somewhat play the game. Combat is very simple, and unfortunately, this is where the game does show its age. The combat is not very accurate, it's pretty simple, you don't have a lot of capabilities, and it's just kind of about whacking at other enemies. It looks messy, it's not too fun, but the cool thing though is that the vampire enemies need to actually be totally killed, so after stunning them, you need to grab them and carry them around and observe the environment. So carry them over and toss them into a shaft of light, or fire, or water for them to burn, or maybe impale them on a spike, or even on a cool weapon you picked up. This is how you can permanently kill the vampires. Also, you're going to want to absorb their souls for health. So still, controlling this stuff still just is finicky and feels kind of old and clunky. If you're used to older games like this, it's fine, you get over it. But if you just play new stuff, you're probably going to be more annoyed. Combat is only part of it. The game does have some really good boss battles, and then there's other stuff Raziel can shift between realms, kind of like the real world and the spectral realm. It was impressive then and is still a cool idea today. So shift to the spectral realm to regain use of your Wraith Blade that you can lose in the real world, but also shifting into the spectral realm will sometimes change the environment and allow you to progress through a level or access areas you couldn't before, and even take advantage of abilities you earn throughout the adventure to progress in some cooler ways, like phasing through walls and stuff. There are a lot of environmental puzzles to progress, and a lot of them rely on good old-fashioned crate pushing. Raziel can move crates around all day okay, man. But even like flip them up on top of each other or onto higher surfaces. And it gets old really quick because it's still old-fashioned, slow, laborious crate pushing. This is another thing that'll probably make or break less patient gamers. Look, if you grew up pushing crates all day like me, fine, whatever, you're good. But just be aware it can get pretty tedious pretty quickly. There's a little bit more of a map this time, it seems, but it only helps so much. They also added a compass, which has helped a little. Otherwise, saving and the world warping structure is still kind of old school and could have used a little bit more of a modern save point, like checkpoint type system. Still, either way, I think you should stick with it because flaws and all, the original is just a great game. I know I said a lot of things that might not be appealing to some players, but really it's the feeling of this game. You just have to experience it. You have to be there. And then Soul Reaver 2 is a little bit of a different beast. So this has more of a normal save and checkpoint structure, and otherwise also just feels like a bit more playable. A little bit less crate pushing at least. And more options during combat and stuff, plus some cool elemental abilities you earn for your blade to utilize throughout the game. Also, it's like a different flavor than the first game, but it continues the story in some really cool and interesting ways since the first game technically ends on a cliffhanger. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, this is a remaster, so the big question of course is the visuals. I mean, look at it here. I'm playing the original Soul Reaver in glorious ultra wide. It's incredible, and I'm not gonna lie, like when I fired it up and I saw it like all on screen, I was pretty excited. So while the options are pretty bare bones, the games look good, and I haven't had any performance issues or anything weird on PC where I'm playing it. On the technical front, it has been good for me. The actual visuals themselves, well, like it's not a complete overhaul. On the one hand, it's one of those remasters where you're able to switch between the new graphics and the old graphics on the fly at any point instantly. I absolutely love this feature. I think it's an important one. It also really has helped me see how much the game is changed. And like I said, it's not as overhauled completely as you might expect. And I think I'm grateful for that because the feel is really, really maintained here. The character models seem to be the things that got the biggest revamps. Like Raziel and Kain especially look really great in the first game now. And some of the in-game cutscenes with them both just end up being more enjoyable because of that. Raziel is smooth and stylish and looks as cool as I really fully imagined him as a kid. You know, matching the look of him on the box art and the pre-rendered cutscenes, that makes all the difference. You actually don't really need too much more than that because the worlds are simple and the environments are similar here. Like they're not insanely overhauled, which means they might not always look the best. To be honest, I saw some textures that still looked really low res and I found that a little bit disappointing. But overall, they're just sharper and often have some better lighting. I will say I was surprised to see, like, when switching back and forth between graphics modes, the environments didn't change too much here. Enough to be noticeable, yes. Cleaner, updated, yes. But nowhere near as noticeable as the awesome character model changes. They're the star of the show here. These are games that were just like ahead of their times, with some aging gameplay that has been tidied up a little bit. But what's really the value here, man, is the quality of storytelling and the games themselves. As simple looking as the original Soul Reaver might seem, bro, you're like desperately dragging these crates and wandering confused through a blank hallway just because you really genuinely want to see what happens next in the story. Raziel's next fallen vampire brother is right around the corner. You know, we want to see what he's like. What's Mobius's real plan? What's Kain gonna do? You're gonna be pretty hooked close to the jump. The voice acting, the presentation, and the writing is awesome.
Reaver was released, and binding itself to me became my symbiotic weapon. And so the Reaver met its former self, still imprisoned in this corporeal shell. I watched, mesmerized, as the Wraith blade uncoiled itself and snaked down the length of the physical blade, embracing its twin, its mirror self.
Raziel narrating his observations of like a room you walk into, with almost a Shakespearean flair, to Kain monologuing about fate, and then the game's ideas of fatalism, vampirism, humanity, and more. all of it just makes for like a good-ass meal to chew into. Other YouTubers who like make these big long essays will probably do a way better job of explaining why the story and the lore in these games is so good. So I'll just say it's really special and unlike what you've seen in games for a minute. It's also one of the showcases of the great game director Amy Hennig, now a legend, who of course went on from this to eventually create the Uncharted series. So there's a lot of history here. From the game selection screen, you can also select bonus features, like this option that gives you some cool stuff. There was a lot of behind the scenes of like the development of these games and what went on, and this collection actually lets you read up on and view some of the unfinished lost levels. Along with that, you get access to music, character renders, and some absolutely gorgeous concept art. There's also the Dark Chronicle, like it's like a kind of way to view the game's scripts. Look, this all seems like an effort not only of the developers, but also the fandom for years and years just caring, just giving a damn about this stuff. And it's just really nice to see it all come together here, packaged in this collection. I think new fans will find the extra content interesting, sure, but I think the old dedicated fans will be really, really happy to see it all collected or gathered here. I absolutely think these games are worth experiencing, warts and all, because of the cool story, the tone and atmosphere. It just feels like something from the 90s and 2000s that we don't have anymore. And not just in games, but in movies and comic books. It's just a very unique, horror-esque fantasy thing. But anyway, I've talked enough. This is a before you buy. You know how this goes by now. I give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion. And now I want to hear yours down in the comments. Do you have any, experience with this series? Did you play the original Blood Omen? Are you a Soul Reaver person? Did you play Defiance? Let's talk about this franchise. I would love to know what you guys think because we never talk about these games here. I'm glad we had an opportunity today though. So if you appreciate this video, maybe it helped you out a little bit seeing the gameplay here, clicking the like button helps us out. We really appreciate it. And if you're new, consider subscribing, maybe hitting that notification bell because we put out videos every single day. But